let's move into the final session, because I guess having a communal conversation about health is part of kind of what we want to build up towards. It is a foundation, as you mentioned, in terms of the service we offer. So I will welcome Pete, Oren, and Brenda onto the virtual stage, I guess, and we'll get our last segment going. Perfect. We fit perfectly into the square now. Just seems much more orderly.
The Brady Bunch.
We are. So welcome. What we could do, we have about, just thinking of the timeline here, I think we're going to about 12:20 here. So I'd like everyone to just quickly tell everyone who they are and where they're coming from, so everyone has a sense of your expertise. We've got some real experience and wisdom around the screen here right now. So why don't I just ask you to do that, and then I'll jump in with the first question and what we're going to talk about today. Sorry, Pete, do you want to go first? I
All
left
right,
you guys
sure, right. I was like, okay, who should go first here?
Sorry, I'm failing in
no
my
problem.
facilitation.
Great to be here, Roger. My name is Pete Bombaci. I'm the founder and CEO of GenWell, which is Canada's human connection movement. And we've been working to educate, empower, and catalyze Canadians around the importance of face-to-face social connection as a proactive step that we can all take for health, happiness, longevity, and for the betterment of society since 2016.
Nice. Brenda, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here, Roger. I'm Brenda Jasmine, and I have my own business. I'm a speaker, I'm a positive psychology coach, and a psychological safety practitioner. And so I go into companies and organizations and talk about positive psychology interventions, how to be more resilient, and how to increase psychological safety within communities and organizations.
Thanks, Brenda. And Oren.
I'm with my people. My name is Oren. I'm the founder of Telos. I'm actually out here in Bali, so across the planet from most of you guys listening. But yeah, I firmly believe purpose, a sense of direction is what a lot of people are missing today. So I built this company to really help particularly young people understand who they aspire to be, what kind of impact they want to have in the world around them. And of course, work and the workplace is an opportunity for people to really serve those larger missions, and I'm excited to jump into that. I know we have some topics teed up there. So yeah, pleasure to be here, Roger, honestly.
Thank you for being here from all the way around the world, because I can't remember what time it is where you are, but we'll just let people guess on that one. So, okay, how do we set the tone for this? We had a feeling, we've always had a feeling that if we could create this beautiful environment in all of our client organizations where people felt safe and able to share and feel vulnerable and talk about everything, that communal support would be sort of the last and sort of major sort of icing on the health and well-being aspect, right? I mean, as opposed to going through health issues or health management completely in isolation, how beautiful would it be if we had our colleagues and our people around us to say, hey, I'm going through exactly that, or this is what I'm doing, and what you're doing is totally normal, or have you tried this? I mean, we sort of have that dream, and it may be a bit of a pipe dream, right? But we can think that we can help organizations, and a lot of the people on this call are trying to help their own organization get to that beautiful place. On the other end of the spectrum, though, as Pete has been so good at making me aware of, is that we have a lot of people that are still, even though they get elements of that communal feeling, they are very isolated, and they're not either getting or seeking out human connection. And so they may be sort of even unaware of that fact, and maybe unaware of how it's truly impacting them in their lives. So what we thought we would do from these experts is try to talk about, what is community? How do we get there? But then sort of the spectrum all the way up and down, and people moving up and down between isolation, disconnection, all the way to the other end. So let's start with this question, and feel free to, whoever feels comfortable defining this is, so for you and what you do, what does community mean to you? So, and I'll just go around the counterclock or the clockwise circle. Pete, do you want to start? And then we'll go to Brenda and Oren.
Yeah, community for me is less about geography, which is where I think most people's heads go when they think about community, but really it's about any place in our lives where we feel like we're part of a group. And let's hope that within that collection of people, we feel that sense of inclusion, belonging, community, connection, whatever word. There's several words that I know people are using right now. And I think it's important that as we think about that community, is it could come through the lens of things inside the office, work, community, but it could also be passions. It could be my family. It could be, friends. It could be old colleagues, new colleagues. And so I think we're really awakening people to just how many places we can find community where maybe we hadn't thought about those as potential places for community in the past.
Nice. Very good. Brenda.
Thanks, Roger.
Okay, I love that answer, Pete. I mean, there's not much more to add. I think Oren captured it when he said, even at the beginning of the call, he said, I'm with my people. And I think, when you feel that, you feel like, and there's a great quote in positive psychology. I don't know who said it. It's go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And I think community for me, it's that felt sense of belonging. It's that, like, I feel like I care about these people, they care about me, or we all care about something. Like maybe we're together because there's a cause we're working toward, and there's some meaning and purpose. And you feel accepted, right? You feel like, yeah, I'm part of something bigger, and these people care about me, and I care about them, and I'm accepted in that group.
So you kind of know what it is when you're in it, right? You like you
Yeah,
said,
it's
or
that.
like I'm feeling
Yeah,
it. You
yeah,
can't
the
define it all
felt
the time, but
sense.
you know when it's there. So yeah, sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Oren. What was your thought on that definition?
Yeah, I mean, Pete and Brenda nailed it. I think we're jumping into what meaningful community is. Like community is just being a part of a group, and not all communities feel meaningful. Not all communities do feel that Brenda just alluded to, right? And so, I think it's communitas, the Latin root, right? Just being together. We're social creatures. We survive by knowing how to pull resources together. So any community that kind of does that is a community. But obviously, we want to jump into what meaningful community is, which obviously
Right.
we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's assume that we may have gone in the other direction in the last number of years and become more disconnected. Maybe we've gotten too comfortable with being disconnected. What are some practical ideas being in that more of a remote environment, to be honest? What would you suggest that people could do to sort of get back to that? Just some practical thoughts to get us going. And we'll start, Pete. Maybe we can go around the same order.
This may not be the exact answer you're looking for in this, Roger, but I think the starting point for everything that we do at GenWell is about education, because we've educated people for 50 years about eating and exercise, sleep, water, don't drink too much and don't smoke. But we took our social connections for granted until this thing called the global pandemic came along. Because we went to the office every day, we went to the gym, we went to the grocery store, we went to all these places. And now that we're not going there, the starting point is making sure that people understand just how significant social connection contributes to their happiness, health, longevity, to society. And on the contrary is how negative the impact is when we don't have that sense of connection, inclusion, belonging, community in our lives. So I think, the practical thing is, hey, let's get people connected. Let's make sure they understand that connection can come from family, friends, neighbors, classmates, colleagues, even talking to strangers, which we've told people for 50 years not to do. And yet the research shows that talking to strangers may be one of the greatest things that we could be doing to heal and build bridges between individuals and communities.
That example of, that feeling you get when you talk to somebody in the elevator where you would have normally just kept your head down, but to do that, it feels so good when you make that effort to do it. So there's a very small example of that. So maybe, like you said, being aware of how this is impacting us is a lot of the work you do at GenWell. So that's great. Brenda, any quick thoughts on what we can do to get out of it?
Yeah, we need to be creating those connections and looking for them. And as Pete said, it can be with strangers, and it can be, we think that creating this sense of belonging has to be such a big thing. But what we know is that it can be so small. And in positive psychology, we talk about micro moments of connection, like the connection in the elevator, like the connection at the coffee shop with a stranger. So with your coworkers and being remote, it's still like that time, when we were in person when you're all gathering and about to sit down at a meeting, and that's when you say, hey, Oren, what'd you do on the weekend? Or hey, Pete, what did you think about the hockey game or whatever? Creating that even in a Zoom call or a team meeting, a call where you can actually give people time and space to create those micro moments of connection. And we all know how to do it. When I'm speaking to a big group of people and I say, go find someone in the room and create a micro moment of connection, I don't need to say, here's how you do it, because they go find someone and the room just becomes alive and you hear the laughter and people just find something to talk about. So those micro moments of connection, creating opportunities for those. And even if the first few minutes of your Zoom call can be creating that, and breakout rooms if it's a really big group, but if it's a group of 5 of you, like, hey, what's good? Like, that's a great thing to start with. What's good in your life right now? Or maybe let them share what's not so good too.
Sure. A little vetting is not always so bad. Oren, what would you suggest? Practical ideas on this?
Yeah, I have the easiest job following up on Pete and Brenda. I think Pete is spot on with education, of course, like letting, teams decide what works best for their culture and really helping them understand, why the changes we're seeing in the world impact how we show up together. And then, of course, connection and creating space for it. I think time scarcity is the number one limiter for human connection today in the workplace. Like, we are constantly rushed, pulled in so many different directions. So just spending 90 seconds to just actually check in, like, how was your weekend or how are you feeling? But you can't fool yourself. It has to be genuine, and people can read through that even through a screen. So it really needs to come from that place. I mean, practical tips. I would also just open up the frame beyond just how many connections, the frequency of connections, to be also including the depth of those connections, right? Like, if you share an adventure with a stranger, right, suddenly you feel like you know them more than some of your friends you might have grown up with, right? And so sometimes creating, whether it's a day to do something with a colleague or find ways to connect people around passions outside of work, there's, creative ways that you can cultivate connection that, transcends just, micro moments as well.
Great. Okay, good. We're getting a good warm up here. Where did we get lost, Pete? Like, where did this social connection thing, where did we lose our way? And is it really now a matter of recognizing the struggles and the signs and the pain that's kind of coming to the surface as to why we're seeking what seems so simple, right? Where did we lose our way on this?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that since 2016, as we've been trying to awaken Canadians to this issue, most people just disregarded it initially. But if you look at Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, research shows really we've been increasingly disconnecting from each other since about the mid 1960s. And we lived during the greatest growth era in the history of the world. And rather than coming together, we started to believe that we didn't need each other, that we could lead these individualistic lifestyles, because if we struggled at all, we'd go do retail therapy. And if that didn't do anything for us, we'd go get therapy. And now I think we're waking up to the reality that if, 1 and 2 doesn't work, oh my God, what are the solutions? And now I think we're going back to, and I look at Brenda, in positive psychology, what are the things that are fundamental to our health and well-being? What are the things that actually make us happy? And we start to realize that it's, connection, it's giving, it's purpose, as Owen is speaking of. And so all these things is part of the learning curve to say, look, we tried all these other things, we disconnected, we created this individualistic, capitalistic society, and maybe we need to shift what our focus is as we move forward. Because as we move forward, I think we can see more challenges around the world, and continuing to do the same things as we've done in the past and expecting a different outcome, I think we know what that result will bring.
Right. I should mention both Brenda and Oren come from that background of positive psychology. It's interesting, the two of you in somewhat of a training process, because Brenda, the topic of that and the skill of resilience and so on is something that we don't necessarily all just have automatically. And that's kind of where you come in. And Oren, interestingly, if you haven't heard of Telos, Telos, he's created an individual app that people can use to sort of navigate that journey and that process of improvement, goal planning, improvement, and so on. And I think it's just interesting that those spectrums come together, right? The individual journey and the communal one, right? Brenda, your area of psychological safety, where does community and that sort of, is it obvious where those two align? those two issues?
Yeah, it really is. So with psychological safety, what my background is in team psychological safety. And so just quickly, like Google did a study, what makes the perfect team, and they found that the number one factor that for team effectiveness is psychological safety. And psychological safety is a shared belief amongst a team that it's okay to share ideas, it's okay to admit mistakes, it's okay to basically, maybe ask a question that without worrying, oh, am I going to look naive if I ask this question? And so psychological safety requires that you feel like I am safe here. And when we go back to what we talked about, what creates a community, well, a meaningful community, as Oren was saying, any group could be a community, is that you feel safe. And so where psychological safety fits in is that if I'm going to feel safe at work, safe within my team, I need to have this sense of belonging. I need to feel like I'm connected to these people, and it's okay to be myself at work. It's okay to, now within reason, it's okay to show up though and really be able to express so that, if I'm in a meeting with Roger, he feels okay to say, hey, this idea might seem really wild and really out there, but maybe we should have a symposium or whatever it is. And that people aren't going to make fun of that idea, that other people on the team, it doesn't mean we can't give constructive feedback, but that it feels safe to do this. And in today's world, we need to be able to innovate, right? To keep up, we need to have learning and to be able to give each other feedback so we can compete and do all these things. But it all starts with this community and feeling safe with one another and feeling like you belong to that team if you're going to really perform. So, it really does help us in our companies. It helps the individual and it helps the organization as well.
Thank you. I can't help think of teams in the sport standpoint because I watch a lot of sports and there's a lot going on right now this time of year when we're recording this. And I think of great teams really have that environment where they have each other's back. Sometimes it's from a physical standpoint in the hockey world, but in the locker room, I can think of even from youth sports standpoints, the best teams are the ones where they can talk openly as kids and share, even where they call each other out on character, and behavior. If a kid can feel comfortable saying openly, like, that's not what we do in this team, right? Or if someone is calling out another player and say, well, no, it's us. This is not about one person. If you see good teams too, when you ask them to commentate, they'll say, what do you think of so-and-so? They'll say, well, it's great that they're on the team, but it's really a collective effort here. And we're gonna lose together or we're gonna win together. So sorry, I had to go on that tangent there. I think Oren and I talked about teams in a quick interview we did around high performance. And we did talk about we all have that sense of the goal, the Stanley Cup or whatever that goal is, that purpose, right? Or meaning. Oren, you obviously have taken the world of positive psychology and that area into more of an internal individual journey, right? How has your experience been with sort of how you've adapted that learning and process into more of an individual application? I hope that I'm not throwing you off here, but I'm very curious
No.
as to how the Telos app, for example, fits into this.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned psychological safety, Brenda. You mentioned Roger, resilience. The world is changing so quickly. Pete, your mention of since 1960s, we've been seeing this trend was really insightful for me. It kind of opened up my frame as well. But I think ultimately, like, we still have the same psychological needs we did 70,000 years ago. And so same brain. And I think that I noticed, especially with this youth mental health crisis, people are seeing the world changing so much. They're like, wait, I don't really want this. And people feel directionless. And I studied through sports psychology, where does human potential come from? Through that, I learned about how Olympic athletes are being guided to craft these mottos of how they want to show up that had nothing to do with the sport that they were playing. It had to do with the virtues and who they wanted to be and their why they wanted to perform at their best. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, it just really inspired me. I recognize this, transcends any field or court or rink. And if we
Hmm.
can all just take the time to explore what really lights us up, who we really want to be, how we want to make others around us feel, we unlock another level of motivation and potential that I think we take for granted. And so, yeah,
Hmm.
the AI coach that I built, it literally guides you to reflect on who you want to be in this next stage of your life. It's as simple as that. And I think that the ripple effect is pretty profound if you really lean in. And that's kind of the mission I'm on beyond just the app. So
Hmm.
hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. For me, and this is sort of, the aspect of you have to understand your ignorance on you have to sometimes go in and really do some work to think about how am I doing emotionally, how am I doing spiritually, how am I doing psychologically in my life. And I think applications like yours and communities that feel safe enough to talk about these things, that's where people sort of come up with some real revelations, right? I guess because they're not sitting around quietly pondering these issues. They're not allowing themselves to take the time to do that. So they need support. They need peer groups. They need, Bianca talked a lot about that in terms of being more aware and understanding of some of these things. So I think it's fair to say that those things. Brenda, would you add much in terms of like that? The resilience issue as a skill, like is that
Mhm.
am I right on that, or is
Yeah,
it yeah.
absolutely. And you actually hit on, I think resilience is a skill. We used to think you either had it or you didn't, or it was just a trait, but it is a skill. And it's mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual slash social. So it's all of those things. And so we know that when we have social connections, that helps us to be more resilient. It helps us to deal with stress better. And I know Pete alluded to a lot of that as well. And I think like with loneliness, they say it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Is that right, Pete? I
Mm.
think that's the
Yeah,
stat, right, on
Julianne
this
Holt
loneliness
Lundstedt.
academic or
Yeah.
epidemic. And so definitely by having, and I love this one study that came out where they said if you're looking at a mountain, like you have to climb, like a hill, that when you're looking at it by yourself, and they say, well, how steep is that? You predict that the incline is much steeper and then if you're standing there with a friend or someone else, then they say, and you're going to climb the hill together, they say, how steep is it? And when you're with someone else, you actually predict that you say the incline is not as steep. And it's because you're with someone. So again, the workplace, right? If we've got these big goals and these things we need to achieve, when we feel connected and we're together moving forward, it helps us to move forward more resiliently and with less stress.
Nice. There was a thought that we would cover sort of this concept of self-care. That term is kind of like, this is my way of taking care of myself, which by definition is, in fact, it's very holistic, but it's also how I would want to treat someone else in the same way. I don't know, for all of you, we can go around and what does self-care mean to you, and how does this social connection or resilience or positive psychological safety aspect fall into self-care? Does that make sense, Pete?
Yeah, hey, I'm going to let Owen go first because I feel like he keeps getting the tail end. So, Owen, why don't
Sure,
you
sure.
start
We can
this
go
one?
in reverse.
Uh,
That's fine.
hey, we're all
That's
in a
fine.
community here. I want to share the love.
Sure. Oren, how's that work for you? Self-care
Sure.
and
Yeah.
its connection into this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those words that speaks for itself. It's caring for yourself. And I think that what's coming up for me is often we think of hedonic pleasures like feeling good and pursuing positive emotions as opposed to really digging deeper and thinking about fulfillment and other sources of well-being. But yeah, I think ultimately it's just being really honest with yourself and checking in with yourself and whatever that looks like. And so some people it's going to recognize, yeah, I'm actually lonely, and like Brenda said, like that's going to impact my health physically, 15 cigarettes a day, and
Hmm.
longevity, you'll probably die earlier. Like it's important to think about it, and I need to start taking action. And so self-care could literally be putting yourself out of your comfort zone to reach out to people and, try to connect. Or it could be I'm burnt out, I'm working my tail off and I'm too stretched, in all these different directions. And I need to do a spa day, which I think typically
Hmm.
is what people think about. But
Right.
self-care is really just putting emphasis on your relationship to self, which I think in today's world where we're connected in so many different directions, it's sometimes hard to do.
Yeah. Brenda, Pete, we don't have to beat this one to death, but if you have any thoughts on that one.
I have a really big thought, and at least it's big in my head. I'm not sure if everybody will think, but I actually think the real insight for me, and Gabor Mate is on about this as well, if people are familiar with him. But self-care doesn't need to be done by yourself. Yes, it's about the self and making sure that you're bigger, stronger, healthier, more resilient. But let's recognize that, I think there's a study, it came out of U of T. It was highlighted in Red January, a campaign that we were partnered with this year. But I think the numbers, you're 67% more likely. It ties back to what Brenda was saying. You're 67% more likely to maintain a new habit if you do it with somebody else. And so when we recognize the power of community, and Gabor Mate has been hard on the whole idea of, we've been so focused on individual well-being, self-care. We fix people up, we try to do our best, and then we go back into a society that is so disconnected and broken in so many ways that we wonder why people end up being back in a challenging state. And so when I think of the workplace, it's about, hey, we need to help the individual be stronger, but the individual should work on being stronger, but the community needs to help each other to be stronger. And so I think this is where we wake up and recognize we're all in this together. Your health and well-being is dependent on me, and my health and well-being is dependent on you. And I think when we broaden that scope of how do I make myself better, I recognize by helping others, I can feel good, but others can help me because they see an opportunity to support the work or the efforts that I'm trying to make.
Right. You're not alone. Just with the time we have left, we have, I think, 5 minutes to remain on perfect timing as we have been through the morning. The one question that has come up throughout this morning is we try to do our very best to offer support to our employees, give them resources, give them really authentic, backup for what they're going through. But at the same time, you and I talked about this before, which is about why are we going back around and saying, but you don't really have permission to do this? Is it something we can actually address? And maybe that's a good way. Maybe you could talk about why that's happening, and then maybe what we could sum up here at the end here is how HR as a role, because that's who's listening, is what can they do to get that off the table, and then ultimately how can they support this communal sort of process that we want to go through?
Well, I think Brenda touched on it earlier when she was talking about the experience of being in a room and giving people the permission to connect, and everybody was thrilled about connecting because, as Oren has said from the start, it's like this is not a new concept. This is thousands of years old. We need each other. And unfortunately, what we've created over the last 50, 60 years is a world where we start to feel like we're not allowed to talk to each other, whether that we've told people for 50 years not to talk to strangers. Before the pandemic, the average Canadian knew one neighbor's name. We don't think of our colleagues for the relationships and the value they can bring other than the moving of the business forward. And this is all part of recognizing that all these different components can actually help us build that, those opportunities to feel connected. But I think whenever we go into a room, if we can, as a workplace, if we can create regular cadences that give people the opportunity to connect, to say, it's okay, this 30-minute period, as Oren said, it's like we're busier than ever. If we don't create the time and the space to say, Friday morning, 8:30, I'm going to be in the cafeteria, come on in. I don't care what we talk about. It's just to get connected. And once a month, we're going to do a potluck. And once a quarter, we're going to get the entire organization. Like, what is it that you need to do in your organization? Do a survey with the people. Ask them what they would like to do, what type of activities. But we know that if we don't create those opportunities to connect, that most of us will just get too caught up in our calendars and never make it happen.
So set the plan and stick to it, I guess is the key there. Great advice. Brenda, do you want to add anything in terms of the idea of permission, but also what should HR people maybe do? What's a good practical thing for them?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I think definitely HR people play a role in that not all managers maybe know how to help foster that sense of community and that sense of belongingness with their teams, with their employees. So maybe it's, making sure that they know, or like letting them know, okay, like the importance of, yes, we have a lot to accomplish, and yet if people don't feel safe to admit mistakes or do the thing, say their ideas, then we're not actually going to get where we need to go as an organization. So what can you do as a manager? And one of those things that a lot of managers are remiss to do is to admit their own fallibility. So if you want someone to admit, like to be vulnerable, be themselves, and I'm not saying you need to air all your dirty laundry, but definitely to be able to say, what am I missing here? Or, here's a mistake I made, so that people feel more comfortable. And then the other skill too is that in a meeting, especially if these are remote meetings, that you're creating an opportunity for people to speak up, because there's this dangerous silence where and sometimes on Zoom people are more nervous to say their ideas than in a room, because we haven't had that community time together. So Pete, your screen just got dark there.
I need
Yeah,
to
so
remove. I had to move
speaking
in the
of
room.
see, that can happen. People feel like I'm not part of this meeting. Thanks, Pete. That was a great example. You can feel like you're invisible, right? So as managers, we need to hear from everyone, and and make it safe for people to feel part of that community and speak up. So HR people, if they can help give their managers the skills to do that, that's wonderful.
It is a skill, and I think it is something they need to build up towards through practice, right? So,
Yeah.
Oren, what do you think? HR, what should they be doing to support more community and give the people the permission to use it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of things HR can do, of course. And I think a lot of incredible HR leaders and people leaders are trying to figure out what they should prioritize. But I don't think there's a one magic pill that any HR leader can swallow. It's really, you got to honestly look inwards. And I mean, Pete mentioned ask, right? Like literally talk to your people, Gen Zers that are coming into the workforce, and how do we get them engaged? Ask them, talk to them, understand their experience, and give them a voice to shape the culture, right? And so I think it's
Right.
really looking at yourself, being honest about what you're trying to cultivate, what kind of culture you're trying to create, and build it together, and then run experiments, right? It's going to happen through action and having fun with it. And maybe it's a potluck that people don't love, but then that ends up another idea that people stick with and self-organize, and it gathers steam on its own. So I don't think there's a one answer. It's really just be honest with yourself, what you're trying to create, and then design it with your people.
Yeah, great ideas. Great ideas. Obviously, it can be overwhelming, as we said at the beginning of our morning, which was there's too many choices. So it's always easy to let's narrow it down. Let's discuss some options and let's put something into play, right? So this has been very interesting. I think it is a very sort of like intangible thing to a large degree to talk about community and talk about social connection in a way, but you have to break it down into practical steps, don't you? Really, it's and HR people can chip away and offer that structure. So I think there is definitely something we can do to support that, and our organizations will benefit greatly, and our employees will certainly appreciate that and be loyal to that, right? So great comments, everyone. I love the sort of combination of perspectives here. And we will sort of wrap it up at that point then, I guess, and we'll leave it there. Thank you again for your contributions. Really appreciate it. And yes, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Welcome. Well, I will just wrap things up here with just a few closing comments. First of all, I want to thank the people behind the scenes, both at Learngistics for producing this show and keeping us on schedule. And the tech seems to have worked very well. Thorpe Benefits obviously is very proud to be working with the clients that we work with. We feel that we are a voice and an educator on many different subjects related to benefits and wellness. And the door is open for people who want to talk to us, to learn things, to get a different perspective. We always sort of recommend that people use us to continue to educate themselves, but also test us. Don't be afraid to ask us a challenging question that we can give you a perspective on. Rather than relying on a single source of information, we're very, very happy to be that other opinion or second perspective that you need. So the learning, as we always say, continues. This is just one example of that. Stay tuned to our website in terms of upcoming events. We have roundtables coming up, which you will be interested in. We have our wellness focus area, which, as you know, is men's and women's health. So feel free to reach out if you would like some guidance on how to get involved. And once again, feel very privileged to be able to speak with you and help you. And thank you, everyone, for your help today. Thanks to all the Thorpe Benefits team members who contributed to everything today as well. So I wish everyone a great afternoon, or if you're on the East Coast, a great rest of your morning, and be well.